One of our new sponsors this year is Herd Boss. It's a place where your farm can come together to track records, reports, and a lot of other results. Sheep, goats, dogs, and cattle are welcome in this inventory system. There's the old way with lots of different parts, moving parts, easy to lose stuff. The new way has Herd Boss as one of the place where you store the records and it prints the reports. It's made with you in mind, easy to use, so easy that grandpa can use it, made for breeders, by breeders. It's totally yours. You own the data. We keep it private and protected. Made for your success. Herd Boss is designed to work as hard as you do. Again, all your records, one place. Never lose a record again. As you can see, pedigree, birth date, etc., etc. There's many helpful reports. Turn your records into power. The birthing calendar, sold record, and you can filter your reports. You can store photos and docs worth 1,000 words. It helps on registration. Know your customers and serve them better by making sales and including them together. Increases productivity, performance, and profit. You can access it anywhere, in the office, truck, pasture, out in the barn even. It's made for teams, so several people can enter in. It's easy to switch up. Any device, anytime, any place. You can do a lot with Herd Boss, but there's some things you won't be doing. Setting at your desk, Herd Boss was made to be mobile friendly. Sorting through stacks of paper or messy spreadsheets. All your animal records one place. Getting bombarded with phone calls. Your whole farm team has the records and reports they need to get their work done. Counting the dates on the calendar, birthing calendars, and other reports are done automatically. Finally, a herd management tool that delivers results. It's our pleasure to help you. Email us at theteam@herdboss.com anytime.
What sets the Purina goat mineral and the Purina Wind and Rain sheep mineral apart from other minerals that are on the market is because they are designed by folks that are in the business. We work very hard at the Purina Animal Nutrition Center in Gray Summit, Missouri to maximize efficiency, to increase the number of lambs that we have on the ground, and I know the goat herds that we work with are on the same role as us. The best way for producers to ensure that they don't have a mineral deficiency is to supply a quality mineral. That's where we have worked so diligently on the Purina goat mineral and also the Wind and Rain sheep mineral to provide myself and other producers an opportunity to decrease problems. From the reproductive standpoint, vitamins and minerals play a huge role in sheep and goat. That's where we have found the biggest contribution to our operation in terms of AI and embryo and then conception on first-time service. So there's a distinct role that the minerals play in repro for us. That's what makes us unique and different, is because we're creating products that work for us.
Contact John Starnes, your Pride Ag Resources LPS and Purina Animal Nutrition Specialist at cell phone 620-518-2370 or at jstarnes@landolakes.com. You can also contact Shelly Hamilton, who's a feed sales specialist with Pride Ag Resources, at her cell 620-393-5872, and that's at shamilton@prideag.com. Contact them for your goat and sheep feed needs.
Stay Tough Superior Fencing Products presents its fence test video. During this video, you'll witness the strength and resilience of a Stay Tough fixed knot fence compared to a standard hinge joint fence, as both are hit by a full-size truck. Stay Tough fence is made of high tensile wire that's 3 times stronger than low tensile wire and will stretch less than 1%. Low tensile wire will stretch more than 10%. Both fences were installed under identical circumstances and using the same tooling and fence design. Let's see the results. Stay Tough Fence comes with a 10-year written limited warranty. Contact us at 1-888-223-8322 or visit our website to find a dealer near you. Stay Tough Superior Fencing Products. Stay strong, stay tight, stay tough.
Getting up on a morning like this and seeing the sun come up is just beautiful. I was herding sheep when I was 12 years old. I had a pack horse and a teepee tent and a stove, and I followed the sheep, and I loved it. In fact, if I had my druthers, I would be out here herding the sheep every day. I don't think there's any better life. We want to be in business for the next generation. We're feeding the world, we're clothing the world, and to us, that's a pretty noble profession.
200.
Makes me feel good that our kids want to raise their kids like they were raised. Makes me and my wife feel like that we must have done something right. My name is Stephen Osgathorpe, and I'm just an old sheep herder.
Making Kansas a better place to live and work has been our goal for over 100 years. It's a responsibility we don't take lightly.
Solid or sediment?
365 meters.
365 meters.
K-State Research and Extension serves our rural and urban neighbors by helping you adapt to new technologies, protect our environment, improve nutrition and food safety, and grow the next generation of leaders.
And my world. And my world.
We help farmers and ranchers adopt new tools that improve profitability in a rapidly changing marketplace.
That went into it, going to help some people.
We prepare and inspire leaders to take on challenges with confidence, be responsible, and give back.
Thank you very much. It will be a great help.
I think K-State Extension is a marvelous partner.
We bring people together to complement each other's unique strengths and make communities more vibrant and successful. We are Kansas State University, in every county, working shoulder to shoulder with organizations, local leaders, and you to help our state grow and thrive. We are K-State Research and Extension.
Right now, I'm Dwayne Craighead, Hodgman County Extension. I'd like to welcome you tonight for the kickoff of the 2022 Western Kansas Sheep and Goat Conference. We'll go, if you have to rejoin, there's been people looking on and off, like it kicks you off or whatever, just keep rejoining. In the past, I've been kicked off myself hosting it, and I've had to rejoin. So we just keep going on. Please make sure your mic's on mute, and I will send you a recording of this next week, hopefully. And then we've got 2 more sessions later on. Today, we're going to be covering the lambing and kidding with Dr. Crane, Kansas State University sheep and goat specialist, and I'll be covering barn records. If you have a question during the speaker's presentation, type it in the chat, and at the end, I will ask her the questions. Depending on the time, we may have you unmute, but we can't have everyone talking at once. So we will send out evaluations, and you can be eligible for some prizes by filling out the evaluation. And we'll draw in persons January 29th, which starts at 10 a.m., but you don't need to be in person to win. So with that, Dr. Allison.
Okay, can everybody see that, or can you see it, Dwayne? Not everybody.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. You can see it and you can hear me. That's good. Okay, so like Dwayne said, I'm going to talk tonight a little bit about lambing and kidding, and I think I've left enough time so that we should have plenty of time for questions, just because a lot of this stuff management-wise is so particular or specific to an operation, so I didn't want to bog down the time with too much information that isn't relevant for you guys. So I have this split up. My slides will change. There we go. I have this split up into a couple of different sections, and the first one is actually before lambing and kidding even start and what we need to think about. So the first thing is something that some of you might not find relevant at all for your operation, and if so, that's fine, but it is something I think that each producer should work towards, or it should be a goal, and that's ultrasounding. So ultrasounding can indicate, of course, whether the sheep or the goats are bred or not, but more specifically, we can do fetal counts and determine if a female is bred with 1, 2, 3, or more fetuses. And the reason that's so important is we can really cater to that female better when it comes to nutrition. And so the more fetuses that female is carrying, the higher level of nutrition that she's going to require to have a successful pregnancy, but also for those offspring to be more successful, more productive in their lifetime, and have increased longevity as well. So beyond that, other things that we need to think about in that last 4 to 6, or sometimes even 6 to 8 weeks prior to lambing or kidding time is shearing. If we're looking at wool sheep, getting that wool off of the ewes just so that we can have less cleanliness issues, but also so those lambs have an easier time finding the teats when it comes to nursing. Also, we need to think about a vaccination protocol. Typically, we're going to give a clostridial C&D shot to those females about 4 to 6 weeks prior to lambing or kidding, and that just gives them an immune boost that will then carry over into those lambs or kids. And then we also need to be monitoring condition of the females in that last trimester of pregnancy. And that's really when the fetus is growing the most. And so we need to provide extra energy mainly to that female, but also look at the protein levels because their protein requirement does go up slightly in that last part of gestation. And so typically we'll increase grain during that last part of gestation, possibly increase alfalfa if we're feeding alfalfa as a protein source in that last bit of gestation. And having proper condition going into that last part of gestation, as well as just proper nutrition going into that part is going to decrease our incidence of ketosis as well as dystocia. And then deworming. So deworming is not always required in that last part of gestation, but it is a good idea to go through about 10% of the females and look at their eyelids. So FEMACHA, if you're not familiar with that, we just look at the membrane, that inner eyelid of the ewe, and we can determine if they need to be dewormed. We don't just want to blanket deworm everything, but we can determine if they need it by looking at that inner eyelid. And if they do, so if it's pale, that's going to indicate that they need to be dewormed. And I can give you more information on that if you need it. But if you do determine that they need to be dewormed, it's a good idea to do it then. These ewes during late gestation, same as human females, are immunocompromised. And so they're going to succumb to a smaller worm population much easier than a ewe that isn't pregnant. And then lastly is external parasites. So if we're shearing, this is typically the time that we're going to use a pour-on for external parasites, whether we're talking about mites or lice or whatever we might be combating. That's the best time to pour on is right after shearing. But even when we're talking about goats or hair sheep, if we tend to have a problem, especially if we're lambing or kidding in a confinement type situation, that's typically when the lice come in. And so that's a good time to also treat for the external parasites. Okay, so a little bit on equipment and setup prior to lambing and kidding. Like I said, if we're going to be lambing or kidding in a more confinement type setting, what I call lambing or kidding jugs can be set up in many different ways. They can also be made from almost anything. I've seen a lot of different setups from a lot of different materials. I was just talking to someone about this the other day because they asked what I prefer, and I told them that a lot of people don't like what I like, and I don't like what a lot of other people like. And so a lot of it comes down to preference, but my preference, if I'm bringing ewes in to lamb into a barn, I like to have something that's really light. I'm a small person. I don't like dragging heavy panels around, especially if I'm having to break them down and set them up and move them around. I like actually what's in the bottom left corner picture. If you can see that, it's a kind of a small picture. But you can see there's little bull panels, what I call them, or hog panels, some people call them. There's just two sections that are cut out and then clipped together in the corner. And you can just continue to set those up in a row. And when you need to move them, you can just fold them up and carry them very easily. They're super light. If one gets messed up, you can pretty easily make another one. And you just keep wiring them together. That's my preference. Like I said, some people don't like those, especially if you have some livelier ewes. If you don't make them tall enough, they can pretty easily jump over them and then knock them over as they're jumping over them. But my first experience with a large group of ewes lambing, that's what we used, and they were pretty rangy Rambouillets, and they did extremely well in it once you got them used to it. But we did have them a little taller than what most people do. And with that being said, you do want to make sure that you have a proper height. And people always ask what the proper height is, and I say it depends on how tall your sheep are. And the same goes for width. You want to make sure that they have enough room that they can turn around without stepping on the lambs or the kids, but you don't want them to have so much room that they're moving around a ton, because then they're more likely to step on the lambs and kids. And you also don't want them to be able to get a run and go to jump over those lambing jugs. But height-wise, I like them to be at least 4 to 6 inches above the shoulder height or hip height of the sheep or the goat, and that tends to kind of discourage them jumping over it. And that's just kind of my rule of thumb. Then thinking about grouping pens. So if you're lambing or kidding on pasture, this has no relevance to you whatsoever, really. But if we're lambing in a confinement type facility, and then we're going to move them gradually into a larger pen or a pasture, I like to go from a lambing or kidding jug, where it's just the ewe or the doe with the offspring, and they have a little bit of time to bond. And if they're doing really well, I usually say 12 to 24 hours in a jug, and then move them out into a grouping pen. And in a grouping pen, I typically like to have anywhere from 15 to 18 head of ewes in the pen. And there's a lot of different management styles as far as keeping up with the females and who belongs to who, as far as the lambs or kids go. I always like a spray paint brand on the side of the ewe, and I do a matching number with the lambs or the kids on their side. So if one gets into a different pen that they don't belong in, I know just by sight pretty easily who belongs to who. That's how I do it. Like I said, some people don't like that, but I find that it's pretty easy. Some people, especially if you're dealing with really large numbers, like to do tags, whether it's color coded by a pen or a number by a pen. But that's typically what I like to do. And then I wanted to mention crete feed here, and I'll talk about it again here in a minute too. But I like to provide crete feed the minute lambs or kids are on the ground. And that's just because if something happens to a female, at least they've seen the feed, the offspring have seen the feed. And they've at least seen the adult sheep or goats consuming feed. And then they have that option in front of them. And I just think the sooner that they get started on the crete feed, the better. I do like to give a crete feed that has some type of coccidiostat in it, just because that's typically the time once they start on feed that you're going to get some coccidia issues, especially if you're in a group feed setting. So I do like to include that, but I'll talk more about what I like to feed as a crete feed here in a minute. Okay, so now once we get into actual lambing and kidding, I like to talk a little bit about the progeny performance and how we impact the progeny performance, or those lambs and kids performance. And so we know that late nutrition for that ewe or doe, late gestation nutrition for the ewe or doe, has a huge impact on the birth weight of her offspring, whether that's a lamb or a kid. And that birth weight, a healthy birth weight, really determines the health and the longevity of those lambs and kids throughout their lifetime. And so when a lamb or a kid is born underweight, they're just less likely to thrive and be productive in their lifetime. So, but more presently, a lower birth weight is going to make that lamb less likely to survive even through the next 48 hours to a week after they're born. So typically, and of course this is dependent on the breed of the sheep or the goat. So our smaller breeds of sheep and goats, of course, are going to have smaller birth weight lambs and kids, and same goes for the larger. But on average, optimum body weights are going to be somewhere between 10 and 13 pounds. And that's what we shoot for as far as a healthy weight. If we start getting under 8.5 pounds, that's when we're going to see an increase in death loss, just because of the general health of those lambs or kids. And of course, goats are going to be, the average is going to be less than 10 to 13 pounds. It's going to be more in that 8 to 10 pound range. And then when we get under that 8 pounds is when we're going to start having some more loss just from general health issues. So like I said, that first 48 hours is going to be the most critical time in that lamb or kid's life to get them through. That's when we lose about 70% of lambs or kids in that birth to weaning period is actually in that first 48 hours of life. So if you can get them through that first 2 days post the lambing or kidding event, you're really doing well as far as the survivability of that lamb or kid. And like I said, it's directly related to body weight. So the birth weight is going to be strongly related to the nutrition of that female, especially during late pregnancy. So like I said, and I repeat this a lot, and I try and say it in pretty much every presentation I do, but the nutrition during late pregnancy is just such an important thing when it comes to the productivity of that next generation of sheep and goats. And it's just the best way to get them started off on the right foot. So I forgot to mention environment during lamb and kidding. So what they're born into can also affect the survivability and also the birth type. And those both have an impact on the birth weight of that lamb. So of course, lambs, kids that are born as a twin or a triplet are automatically going to be a lower birth weight. And so they're automatically at more of a risk of not making it through that first 48 hours. But if we can get them started off on the right foot with giving them adequate nutrition while they're still a fetus or inside that ewe or doe, we're automatically letting them start off ahead. So the three main causes of death that we see in newborn lambs and kids are starvation and hypothermia, and they're listed together because they typically occur together. So if they don't have enough nutrition in their system once they're on the ground, typically they get too cold, they become hypothermic, and we lose them. And then pneumonia and difficult births or dystocia issues. So a lot of this is management, but sometimes it can be from the maternal genetics, a nutritional problem, and then some things just aren't manageable though. Sometimes you can be doing everything right and you'll still run into these issues. And I always like to mention with pneumonia that if you are having widespread pneumonia issues in your newborn lambs and kids, or if you're having chronic issues in your older lambs and kids, it's a really good idea to test the draftiness or having proper ventilation in your barn or wherever you're lambing and kidding. There is such a thing as too much ventilation where you get those drafts. And of course, we all know that there's lots of incidents of not having proper ventilation. But the biggest thing is a lot of people walk around at our head level and think that ventilation is great in their barn, but that's not where that lamb or kid is breathing. So you want to make sure that you're testing that ventilation or the draftiness and also the ammonia, not pneumonia, but the ammonia smell down low, and making sure that you're not getting too much ammonia breathing from the ground and those lambs and kids breathing that in, because it can burn their respiratory tract and make them more susceptible to respiratory infections that can lead to pneumonia. So that's something else we really want to be aware of. I always say, if you have some kids around, make them crawl, human kids around, make them crawl around on the barn floor and ask them if it stinks to them. And if they say yes, you might want to get down there and see if it's the ammonia smell. Okay, so the next thing is colostrum. So colostrum is liquid gold. It's that milk that's produced by that ewe or doe up to 18 hours after the birthing event. Newborns are highly susceptible to hypothermia, like I said, and getting colostrum in those newborns is one of the best ways we can combat hypothermia occurring. Those newborns have very low energy reserves. And then we have these large body surface areas with a very low ratio to the body weight of that newborn lamb or kid. So that paired with the low energy reserves is a perfect combination for hypothermia to occur if you don't get some type of nutrient load in them pretty fast. So that's when we want to get the colostrum and then make sure they get it within 30 to 60 minutes after they're born. So if you don't see them up and nursing, that's when we have to start talking about interfering with them getting some type of nutrition. So with that being said, normal temperature for a lamb or a kid is 102 to 103 degrees. If they fall below 100 degrees temperature, then they're considered hypothermic. And so before we ever administer any type of nutrition to a lamb or a kid that we think is hypothermic, we want to gradually warm them up. We don't want to suddenly get them warm, and we also don't want to dump warm milk into their system because we can make them go into shock. So we want to get them warm slowly. So I always like to, if they're out in a barn, I like to bring them inside, wrap them in a warm towel, or whatever you have, and then gradually bring their body temperature up. And so once you kind of get them started warming up, typically they'll kind of perk up. And there's lots of different warming boxes that you see out there. So I actually like to just get a plastic tote, put some towels and straw down in it, wrap them in a warm towel. That gets them relatively warm pretty fast. And then a hair dryer works great. Just turned on a low warm setting, but just be careful of where you're pointing it and where you're sitting it. You don't want to cause a fire. But people also make wooden boxes where they can hang a hair dryer in them. There's lots of different designs for those. But that's a great way to gradually bring their body temperature up. And then once they have a relatively normal body temperature, that's when we can start tubing or trying to give them a bottle. It's a good idea though, if they've already been hypothermic and you don't think they've gotten colostrum, to just go ahead and tube them. I am an advocate for tubing lambs and kids if they have not gotten colostrum. So ideally, we are going to tube with colostrum if we don't think they've had it. And ideally, it's going to be colostrum from the female that they were born from. If that's not possible, you want to get the colostrum from a ewe or a doe that's in your flock. And if that's not possible, maybe you have some frozen or fresh reserves saved. If that's not possible, then even from a neighboring farm is ideal. And then lastly, you would want to do a mix that you store bought. But it's just that typically the best resource you have is within your flock for providing the antibodies that those lambs or kids are going to need throughout their lifetime. So ideally you would get it from within your flock. Okay, so I'm not going to read all of this to you. We can provide these slides. I always like to point out though that a lot of people tend to panic when it comes to tubing a lamb or a kid just because they've never done it before, and it can be scary. Yes, you can drown a lamb or a kid with the milk, but I always tell people though too, when you're to the point of having to tube a lamb or a kid, it's usually a last resort. So typically the lamb or the kid is going to die if you don't tube them. So don't be too scared to tube them. And it actually is a relatively simple thing to do. And this YouTube video that I have linked on this slide is a great simple video explaining how to do it, what to look for, if you're in the wrong place and if you're in the right place. And the biggest thing is to make sure that you've kind of lubricated the end of the tube. Once you're putting it down the mouth, the throat of the lamb or the kid, don't force the tube down, allow them to gradually swallow it. And typically you can kind of feel that tube going down the neck of that lamb or kid. And that's when you want to actually give them colostrum. I like to use a 60 cc syringe just wedged into that tube. And then that colostrum will just slowly drain out of that syringe into the lamb or kid. And this just gives you kind of the formula estimated amount of colostrum that lamb or kid would need according to body weight. And then getting into a checklist. So this kind of gets into the equipment or supplies that you might need for your operation. So things that we need to think about that we're going to have to do after lambing or kidding actually occurs, or tagging, weighing those lambs and kids. How are we going to ID those lambs or kids? So like paint branding, like I said, Are we going to dock tails, castrating, any vaccines or antitoxins we might need on hand? So tagging, depending on what kind of tags you have, you may want to make sure you have taggers or the tagging guns. Make sure you have plenty of tags on hand. And then as far as weighing, there's some really cheap little fish scales out there that work great hooked onto a bucket. Some people like the little lamb kid slings hooked onto a scale. Lots of options out there for that too. Branding, I always say use scourable paint. Typically you can find it in any livestock type store. And then for docking, of course, it just depends on how you want to dock tails. Of course, most people are going to use a bander for both castration and tail docking. If you are wanting to actually cut tails, then making sure that you have an operational tail docker, making sure that that works before you get into actually lambing and kidding. And then, of course, making sure you have those proper vaccinations on hand. So there's lots of vaccinations out there. Typically for the lambs and kits though, just to get them started out, we're only going to be giving a Clostridial C, D, and possibly T. And for lambs, it's suggested that you give the first dose 2 to 3 weeks prior to weaning, and then that booster of CD and T at weaning time. If they're going on to a high concentrate feed ration, I always suggest giving them an extra dose once they are getting bumped up on that feed ration. And then I always say it's a really cheap vaccine. If one of them even looks at you funny and they're on heavy feed, I give them another round of the vaccine. And that's just to prevent overeating. And then antitoxins have been really hard to get a hold of right now, so I have it in there. And if you can find them, great. I wouldn't tell anybody where to find them if you're finding them. But a lot of people might have a tetanus issue, especially if you didn't get that CD and T vaccine into those ewes prior to lambing or kidding, or ewes or does prior to lambing or kidding. And so you might run into some toxicity issues with tetanus. And it's a good idea to have that antitoxin on hand. But like I said, it can be really hard to get a hold of right now. Okay, so this is just a big list of things that I like to have pretty close by during lambing or kidding. One of the things I wanted to mention, there's heat lamps on this list. I actually don't use heat lamps. It's probably the #1 cause of barn fires. So if you are going to use a heat lamp, or that design where you have the barrels turned over with a heat lamp mounted inside, just be very wary, make sure they're wired up or somehow connected to where even if something falls, that it's not going to be on the ground to actually cause a fire. And then iodine, scissors for trimming navels. I'm a big advocate of dipping navels just because, especially with our lambs and some kids, we see a lot of navel ill, and dipping those navels can prevent that. Making sure that we do have bottles on hand. I had a picture of that Lactec machine. If we're lambing and kidding out a lot of sheep or goats, it's a really nice option to have with that automatic milk machine rather than bottle feeding that many lambs or kids. And then also thinking about if you have a ewe or a doe that maybe her lambs or kids die, or maybe she's just producing a lot of milk, thinking about later on in that lambing or kidding season, actually milking her out and getting some of that extra colostrum or extra milk. And if you don't use it within a few days, freezing it so that you have it for the next year, or just later on in the lambing or kidding season. But making sure that we're thinking ahead so that we can supply ourselves if we ever run into a wreck down the road. And then as far as grafting goes, I have a few bullet points here. So there's a few tricks that you can use for grafting, and there's a lot of different opinions on grafting. A lot of people use VapoRub and actually rub the Vicks VapoRub on the end of the ewe's nose or the doe's nose, and then on the lambs or the kids. And it kind of disguises it where she doesn't recognize that that lamb or kid is not hers, because all she can smell is the Vicks, and the lambs and kids smell like Vicks. And so it's a great cover up. You can do the same thing with vanilla extract. And then of course, some people skin the lamb or kid that died and graft by just placing the skin of that other lamb or kid onto the one you're trying to graft onto that female. And then of course we can just try, and if she's just recently lambed or kidded, we can try and get some fluid out from her and rub that on the lamb or kid to try and graft. There's a lot of different methods there. If y'all have any questions about that, I know we have some producers in here that have done a lot more grafting than I have, but I know I've only ever done the fluid way, or just trying to convince her that she's wrong. And I've had a decent amount of luck with it. But we can talk about that too when we get to the questions. This is just a list of different drugs that I like to have handy. I know we have at least 1 or 2 vets on here, so forgive me if I have some off-label stuff on here. And we can talk about that too. I don't think I have many things on here. I think only one thing is off-label. So, but Exceed is a great drug for any type of respiratory infection in baby lambs. I've had a lot of luck with it in both baby lambs and kids. And then of course, a lot of other drugs, propylene glycol for preg tox. Electrolytes are a great thing to have on hand, both for the females and for the offspring. I typically, in lambs that or kids that just aren't thriving in that first day after they're born, I give a concoction of a B12, Bosi shot, and Nutridrench. And then I also tube them with colostrum, and that little concoction has revived a lot of lambs and kids. And some people say I'm overwhelming them, but I like to just throw everything at them to try and get them up. And I think I've saved more than I would have otherwise. So it's something to try if you're pretty desperate to save some lambs or kids that have just gotten too cold or were just born really weak. I think this is my last slide, but lastly, to talk about creep feeding. It's a great way to increase weight gain. And like I said, get those lambs and kids started off on the right foot, give them a better chance if something happens between lambing and kidding and actually weaning. And so there's a mix here that it's just a mix that I've used in the past with that shelled corn and soybean meal. But you can just use straight soybean meal or any type of texturized feed. Anything that is going to provide different textures can increase the curiosity of those lambs and kids and get them started on that feed faster. Typically, we're going to look for a 12 to 14% crude protein creep. If you can start with a meal form, they're going to be more likely to eat that as well. And then you can gradually introduce different textures, whether that's a cracked or a rolled grain. The biggest thing is that if you're only going to provide a single nutrient or a single ingredient, excuse me, you don't want that ingredient to be something that's going to upset their stomach or give them acidosis. So something like soybean meal that's going to be pretty mild would be a good single ingredient to start out with. Yep, that is all I have. And I think we have some time for questions, maybe.
Does anybody have any questions? Go ahead and unmute if you want to and ask. Okay, here's one online. It said, can goats have the recommended corn ratio in the creep feed slide?
Yeah, so goats are going to be a little bit more sensitive to that level of corn, of course. And this is something that you would want to gradually get up to that 90%. But the thing is with a creep feed, they're not going to hit this diet really hard. And And so you don't have to worry about it being such a high ratio. But this is something that we used where I worked in North Dakota in lambs. And so I always say we always started things off a lot harder than a lot of other people do. And so you can back that off, especially in a goat. I would recommend backing that off just because that is a high level of corn. But the little kids are not going to consume enough of that to typically give themselves acidosis. It's a good question. I've never had anyone ask that from that slide before, actually.
So what was your combination or medicine for the new kids that aren't thriving after birth?
Okay, so yeah, I give, I follow the label, but I give, I believe it's like a half a cc of B12 and about the same of the BOCI or the, selenium vitamin E shot, and a pump of the Nutri-Drench. So if you can get any type of, because Nutri-Drench is just that high electrolyte, has a lot of sugar in it, basically an energy, nutrient dense, I don't even know what liquid paste kind of thing. And so if you can't get Nutri-Drench, and Nutri-Drench is a little pricey if you're having to use it on a lot, but anything that would kind of check all those boxes. So something high in electrolytes with some sugar, lots of glucose. So I've used Pedialyte in the past, and that works really well too. But that's the combo I like to give. And then as soon as you get them warmed up, get the colostrum in them. But I've also done it in older lambs or kids, that are, past the colostrum stage and they've already had colostrum, but maybe they get cold, or maybe the ewes stopped milking and they went down for a little while. I've also used it to kind of boost them as well. And it seems to work pretty well.
Could you touch on white muscle disease a little bit in newborn lambs, what that looked like, and as far as successful treatment, if that's possible, or prevention?
Yeah, so especially in different areas in Kansas, well, and throughout the country, some locations are higher in selenium in the soil and some are lower. So I'm starting out the kind of the end of your question, but I'll use it to answer the question. But so if we have low selenium in the soil, those ewes or those does that are consuming feed off of that low selenium soil are going to have low selenium stores in their body. And so the lambs or kids born to those females are also going to have a lower exposure, if you will, to selenium. And that's when we can run into, or most commonly, when we can run into some white muscle disease in our lambs and kids. And typically we can treat, especially if it's a mild case, we can treat with a BOCI shot. And sometimes we have to give therapeutic doses of that. And so therapeutic meaning more than one or two. And so sometimes it can be more like a B12 issue where we, sometimes people recommend different things, but we might give one shot or two shots the first day, 12 hours apart, and then the next day the same, and then kind of wean them off of it. But then sometimes we can just give one or two doses of BOCI and they pull right out of it. But I think when it's the more severe cases, we do have to give multiple doses. And I've been lucky. I haven't had to deal a whole lot with white muscle disease, but that is typically when you see it, is when those ewes or does are actually consuming low amounts of selenium. And so if you're seeing a lot of white muscle disease in your lambs or kids, of course, get the BOCI and try and treat it. But going into the next breeding cycle, try and find a mineral that has more selenium in it than your standard sheep or goat mineral. And they do exist out there. And some of them actually advertise that they're a high selenium mineral. And then those ewes and does will have a higher store of selenium, and you're not going to run into as many, or I shouldn't say you're not. Typically, you're not going to run into as many white muscle cases in your lambs and kids if you can get those ewes and does to have a higher store. So hopefully I answered all that.
So how do you treat joint ill?
Most successful treatments I've seen were with antibiotic. And I know I saw Becky on here. I don't know if she's had to treat it at all. But we've tried treating it with a few different antibiotics. I know some people have had some luck with like Zactran. And other people have had some pretty good luck with Draxxin. Thought I was about to say the wrong drug there. And I've seen it go really well with either one of those. And I've seen some of them not respond at all. And that's where I think some of the joint ill is caused by something else. And so we're just not getting successful treatment with either one of those antibiotics. But I've also seen people treat with like LA 200 or 300 and turn them around too. So you don't always have to use those pricier antibiotics. But as a prevention, typically if we're dipping navels in an iodine solution, and especially if we're trimming the navels, if they're dragging the ground, if we trim those navels and then dip them, we can prevent a lot of those cases. But that being said, I know people that do that very thing that still get joint ill. And a lot of times it's because they're having a lot of E. coli, I just lost the word, scours in their lambs or kids. And when we have that, especially a chronic case of the E. coli scours, we typically see a lot more joint ill. And so we want to make sure that we're getting those facilities cleaned between those lambings and kiddings where we do have E. coli scours, and getting the scours cleaned up as fast as we can to prevent the joint ill too.
Any other questions?
If we missed getting, so we have goats, and if we miss giving them the tetanus shot because they're gonna kid like any day now, like do we give it to the mom now, or is it too late because you said to do 4 to 6 weeks?
Yeah, so that's what people typically do if they do it. And I'll say this because I don't want you to be scared. A lot of people don't do it and don't run into the problem. If you've had tetanus issues previously on farm, that's when I worry about it more, I should say. I always like to give it as a preventative just because it's a really cheap vaccine. You might as well do it. But if you've had tetanus on farm before, you're more likely to run into those issues with the lambs and kids. And those newborn kids, and I'm glad you asked this because I forgot to say it. I knew I forgot to say something, and that's what I forgot. It's actually recommended, this is K-State veterinarians, but it's recommended that you give newborn kids, and this is the only time I've ever heard anyone say this, but give those newborn kids the CD&T vaccine. And their reasoning is that goats especially don't have a lot of passive transfer of antibodies from the female to the fetus. So that CD&T vaccine prior to kidding is less effective for them. And so they actually recommend within the first 24 or 48 hours of birth that those goat kids get that CD&T vaccine. And some people disagree with it and they say you might as well squirt it on the ground. But like I said, it's a cheap vaccine. And to me, you might as well do it as a preventative. But so I would be less worried that you didn't give it prior to kidding, and just go ahead and give it to them once they hit the ground.
Okay, what would you recommend for the dosage? Because it's obviously not on the bottle for that, their weight.
Yeah. I'll look it up to make sure. Okay, and Becky just said something too. Oh, okay. So we would typically give, I think we were given like 3 cc's because it's really safe. It's a killed vaccine. So for adults, it's what, 5. So I think we were doing like 2.5 or 3. And it's, like I said, it's really safe. So you're not having to worry about, you're not going to OD them or anything like that. But I also can look it up and get it to Dwayne too.
I have a question on bottle babies. I raise goats and I've kind of had a struggle with the bottle babies. I gave them a CDNT shot. This was last year. And I gave them probably about 48 hours after birth. And then I was on day about 18 and I was going to repeat at 21. And I'm pretty certain that that is what killed that bottle baby. But do you have any suggestions as far as when you're dealing with the bottle babies other than CDNT, anything special, extra they should be getting? Or I try to watch, how much they get per body weight and all that as far as how much they get per day, but any advice on that?
Yeah, so my biggest recommendation is that once they're started pretty well on the bottle and you're not having to worry about them actually consuming the bottle, gradually cool the milk off. I don't know if you were doing that or not, but to start, it's really hard to get them to drink cold milk. But
okay,
once you have them on a bottle, and you're just not worried about them staying on a bottle at all, then start to cool the milk off. And if you can get them to drink a cold bottle, it'll slow them down. And that tends to help with the overeating. And then also too, try and get them started on feed as soon as you can.
Okay.
So if you can just put a bucket in there, or even some kind of a tray, or if you have a little hanging feeder that they can get into, just put some, whatever you're feeding the ewes, or you said goats, sorry, does.
That's okay.
Sorry, I'm trying to be better about switching back and forth, but whichever one, the female, but when whatever they're eating or whatever you might be providing as a creep, if you are providing a creep, or like I said, if you have soybean meal or something like that, just put it where they can get to it. And then that way you can transition them faster. But like you said, you did the right thing with giving that dose within the first 48 hours. And then, and maybe what I would do is at like day 14, give another one.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Well, if not, thank you, Allison.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you guys for listening.
Allison will be here in Jetmore on the 29th for her, and I think Dr. Becky's going to be there to help pregnancy check goats and sheep, and we're got a lot of hands-on stuff planned for that day. Right now, we're going to do some records. Again, if I can get the right screen, well, don't have it. I need to get the right screen pulled up. And then we'll get started on it. That's not the right one. Okay. We have a question sometimes of, do we need lambing and kidding records, are they needed? Here's some simple kidding and lambing barn records. You can see the U number is out, the date they were born, the U number, the lamb numbers, what sex it was, whether it was born a single, twin, or a triplet, and in the birth weight, and in some comments. Different things. It may be, you know, like on the second to the bottom one, it was a big lamb and it was assisted. So, you know, the very bottom one, it was backwards at birth. Some of those things really help when you go to when you go later on and you've had more sleep. So my feeling is this is probably the minimum. Some people won't put birth weight on there because they know that their lambs are a certain number, maybe say 10 pounds. But if you have a real small one, you want to put that down that it was really small, or if it's got a really heavy one. That's what I would recommend. So the barn records I just showed you, we're going to just see how well your memory is. What was the U number that had triplets? The one that fostered other ewes lamb had a single lamb. How many males were there? How many ewes gave birth? The dates of the births. And then roughly, if you're using a 60-day wait, when should you wean? And that's what the kidding barn will help. So the first one is, what number was the ewe that had triplets? It was R345. I didn't let you look at them for very long, but when you're tired and out in a kidding or lambing barn and you're not getting much sleep, or someone else comes in, sometimes things can get changed. So that's why it's good to have. Which one was the one that fostered other ewes? T143. Which ewe had a single lamb? It was that T143. How many of them were males? 2. How many ewes gave birth? 4. What was the dates of birth? January 5th and 6th of 2022. If using the 60-day weaning weight, when should you wean? What we kind of say is between 45 and 75 days, 15 days either side of it. So those dates would be there. So then if you got bigger lambing groups, you're going to wean more often, so you'd shrink those dates down. What's the biggest reason to keep barn records? Eliminate confusion and improve your sheep production and profitability. You can't manage what you can't measure or what you don't measure. Some of the uses for barn records: helps eliminate faulty memories. If kids and lambs can get out, can ID a dam and lamb and put them back in the correct pen. If more than one person is helping with lambing, it brings consistency between shepherds, can identify when to wean. Comments allows for all possible reasons to cull or other notes that you might want put in there. And if taking a weaning weight, you can ID the ewes producing more milk on a weaning weight. What are some of the concerns in barn records? If you're using paper, sometimes they'll get wet and it's hard to read when the ink smears, or the records get lost, or the ewes do chew some of them. That's happened before. Or the penmanship's so bad that you can't read what you wrote, or neither can your other people in the barn. What's some of the things about electronic barn records? Can be expensive. Some can be with a phone, some with an electronic reader. Maybe no internet in the barn. Requires a program. If typing in information can hit a wrong key. If you do have electronic tags and you have a reader, they get the tags right anyway. You need to have a dedicated unit or paper backup if for people to see if you're more than one of you in there. Again, what was the minimum? I've listed mine. Then it look something like that. Premier, Pipestone, this is their lambing record, copy of their lambing record. Here's another goat record. This is the Hampshire lambing book. This is what's in their book. Oklahoma State's kidding record. It's pretty intense, but it takes them all the way through. And here's another example. It tells when you did the C&D-T. You can put in it what you want. And here's another one. And this is one from across the seas over in England. They use kilograms over there, and so this was taken from one of their publications. One of our sponsors this year is Herd Boss, and I'm going to run through pretty quick some of their records that they use or can use. We kind of went through it. Sorry about the volume not being turned up or something. We'll get it figured out eventually. But it can be used for sheep, goats, dogs, and cattle. It's all in one. It can be used on several different instruments. I think everybody can have their own phone and put it on it if you got access to the internet. All your records in one place. Got a lot of different reports. You can put photos on there and they're worth 1,000 words. You can put your registration documents, tie them all together with the record, tie your sales and buyers together. So it's made to increase productivity, performance, and profit. And it can be spread over any of the devices. And says you won't be sitting at your desk, so you will still be doing some of that though. Personally, I like Excel spreadsheets, but some people don't. There are other, I just got on for a little bit onto the internet just to see how many electronic record management software there was. This is a few of them. I know some of the producers that we have, you have Sharewell, and it's the FarmWorks is their software. Some have Gallagher. The Herd Boss, there's a producer that has that in the state. So we do have a wide range of different softwares used. I'd like to thank you for participating tonight. Do you have any questions? I'm gonna have to get out, escape this, and so you can see, or so I can see. Okay. If you have any questions on the records, I know I went through that pretty quick, but we're getting about time to close the evening out.
Dwayne, I had a comment on the lady that had a question about the bottle lambs on vaccines. We've had several veterinarians over the years talk about once a week vaccinations on those bottle lambs. And we've been doing that quite a few years, and I think that does a pretty good job of giving those lambs protection.
On record keeping, saw an idea and we tried it for fall lambing. Get the collared duct tape, get 3 collars, one for singles, twins, triplets, if you need some for quads and more. And hang that, wrap a piece around the panel on each jug and quick write down the date, how many lambs, any shorthand notes that you need to. That way, if somebody else comes through doing evening chores or something, it kind of helps you communicate before everybody gets fully tagged. If the lambs are still wet and need a little TLC or something, kind of helps communication gaps until you get everybody tagged and get it on the handheld stock recorder.
Good idea. Tinley asked, will a recording of this be emailed out? And a link to it will be. I'm losing my voice, so I'll try to get through tonight. Any other questions? It will take a little bit we have to convert it and kind of clean it up when we send it out. So it'll hopefully be out next week. Will be when I get it sent out.
Allison that does our prank checking, she was on here. She was giving some really good stuff, but I had to get out and go talk to freaking Letitia. I wanted to gab.
Oh, the goat seminar. Yeah.
So I missed. She was saying something about CD&T and she gives it.
Any other questions? If not, thank you all for coming. Again, we're going to be hosting another one on Wednesday, January 26th, and it's going to talk about financing, marketing, and some budgets. And then we'll have our all day, well, not all day, our Saturday in-person meeting in Jetmore at the Hodgman County Fairgrounds from 10 to 2 or 10 to 3. And we'll be Allison and hopefully Dr. Becky will be helping with scanning for pregnancy for goats and sheep. And then Allison will be doing some scanning for the loin eye area and the back fat. And then we'll be having a working dog demonstration and a few other things. So you're welcome to come in and join us then too. All right, Becky says she'll be there. Great. So with that, if there are no further questions, I guess we'll sign off.